3 days later, he saw a flag on the security feed at 11:52 p.m. Not an alarm. Not a confirmed threat. Just a pattern his team had been trained to notice. 3 men. Positioned at the eastern end of Yuljiro. Not moving, not talking, just waiting. The same stillness that had appeared outside Hansong Tower weeks ago. Taehyun was already reaching for his phone before the analyst finished his sentence. He dialed and it rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. He pulled the phone from his ear and looked at it for 1 second. Then he looked back at the screen. At the map. At the dot that represented Linda's last known location. The university library. Her usual route home passed directly through Yuljiro. He was already standing. Where is she right now? Jung-ho was typing fast. Last camera ping puts her leaving the library 6 minutes ago, sir. On foot. Her phone, a pause. Her phone is showing offline. The room went very still as Taehyun looked at the map. At the gap between the library and the subway entrance. At the narrow side street she sometimes cut through when the main road was blocked. His jaw tightened so completely it looked carved. Find her, he said quietly. Now. If you are watching this from part 1, welcome back. You already know this story doesn't play fair with your emotions. And I need you to subscribe right now and hit the bell because what is coming in this video will make part 1 feel like just the beginning. Drop a comment and tell me. Do you think they will find her in time? She had left the library at 11:40. Later than usual. Her phone was less than 10%, barely enough to get home. The main road was blocked by a delivery truck so she cut through the side street without thinking twice. The street was narrow and poorly lit. The kind of street that looks fine until you're already in it. She was halfway through when she heard footsteps. More than before. She turned around and saw 4 men blocking the entrance behind her. She turned forward and saw 2 more at the other end. 6 men in total. Her stomach dropped. Hey African girl. The one in front smiled the same slow smile from before. We've been patient. Linda gripped her phone. It had 1 bar of battery. She opened her contacts fast. Don't bother, he said. Your Korean Mafia boyfriend can't hear you all the way out here. She pressed call anyway and the line connected. Lin. The phone was knocked out of her hand. It hit the ground and the screen went black. Then the men closed in. But she fought back because Linda George did not go quietly anywhere. She caught one of them hard across the face with her elbow and heard him grunt. Felt a moment of savage satisfaction before 2 of them grabbed her arms at the same time. As she kicked and screamed, a hand clamped over her mouth. Stop, the leader said calmly. Stop fighting and this stays simple. She bit down hard on the hand over her mouth. The man swore violently. She got one arm free and ran 2 steps before they caught her again. This time they didn't let go. The van was parked at the end of the alley. She hadn't even seen it. The doors were already open. No. But they forced her in. The doors slammed shut and the van moved. Inside the van Linda sat with her wrists bound and her jaw set. She was angry. At them. At herself for taking that route. At the dead phone sitting somewhere on the ground in that alley. But underneath the rage, something quiet and cold. Fear. She didn't let herself feel it for long. Because Linda George didn't have that luxury right now. She looked around the van carefully. 2 men in the back with her. Driver and 1 more in front. 4 total. She filed that information away. Think Linda. Think. 9 minutes later, Taehyun's phone lit up in the operations room. With a location, a partial plate, a warehouse on the eastern edge of the city. He picked up before the second ring. Eastern Warehouse District. Abandoned Sinho storage facility. 12 men. He was already moving. Bring everyone. They had taken the one thing in Seoul that Kang Taehyun could not replace. And they were about to find out exactly what that meant. The convoy moved through Seoul like a silent storm. No sirens, no lights. Just 6 black vehicles cutting through the city's eastern corridors at speed. Taehyun sat in the lead car, still and quiet. The kind of quiet that made his men in the front seats keep their eyes strictly forward. Jung-ho sat beside him with a tactical update running on his tablet. 12 confirmed inside. 4 at the perimeter. 2 on the roof. Tae-hyun looked at the screen without expression. And Linda? He asked. One heat signature separated from the group. Eastern corner of the building. She's... Jung-ho paused. She's standing, sir. Not on the ground. Something moved in Tae-hyun's jaw. She's standing, he repeated quietly. Like those 2 words meant everything. Because they did. Inside the warehouse, Linda stood exactly where they had put her. Center of the room, wrists retied, for men around her. The leader sat on a crate across from her with his phone out, waiting for a call back, waiting to negotiate. Linda looked around the warehouse slowly. High ceiling, 3 entry points, 2 windows boarded but not secured, loading bay door on the far left. She filed everything away and said nothing. The leader looked up from his phone and asked, "Comfortable?" "Surprisingly no," she said flatly. He smiled. "You're funny. I'll give you that." "How long have you been watching me?" Linda blurted. He tilted his head. "Long enough." "Long enough to know who he is," she said. "Which means long enough to know this was a very bad idea. Or a very good one." He shrugged. "Kang Tae-hyun has never cared about anyone enough to pay for them before. You're either worth a lot of money." He looked at her carefully. "Or you're worth something he can't put a number on." Linda held his gaze. "And which do you think it is?" He studied her for a long moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that whatever you did to that man." He leaned forward slightly. "You have absolutely no idea how deep it goes." The first sound was nothing, and that was the terrifying part. No warning shots, no shouted demands, no announcement of any kind. Just the loading bay door exploding inward in one single devastating hit. Then at the same time, both boarded windows. Men poured through all 3 entry points at once. Fast, coordinated, and overwhelming. The warehouse erupted with shouting and crashing. The sharp sound of a fight that was completely one-sided from the very first second. Linda dropped immediately, down to her knees, out of the lines of movement around her. The 4 men guarding her turned toward the chaos, and were taken down so fast she barely tracked it. The leader was on his feet with a weapon raised. A single figure walked through the loading bay entrance. No rush, no weapon drawn. Just walking. Like the chaos around him was just a weather he was passing through. Kang Tae-hyun. The leader aimed directly at him. "Stop right there." Tae-hyun didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Didn't even look at the weapon. He just kept walking. Straight and steady through the middle of everything. 2 of his men appeared from either side in that second and put the leader on the ground before he finished his sentence. The weapon clattered across the concrete floor. And then the warehouse went quiet. Just the sound of men breathing hard and the distant buzz of the city outside. Tae-hyun walked through it all without looking left or right. His eyes were on one thing only. Linda, kneeling on the concrete floor in the eastern corner. He crossed the warehouse in long strides and crouched down in front of her. His eyes moved over her face fast, looking for damage. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said immediately. "Linda." "I said I'm fine." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. He saw them. She saw him see them. But neither of them said anything about it. He reached forward and broke the zip tie off her wrists in one sharp movement. His fingers stayed around her wrists for just a moment after. Not grabbing, not testing this time. Just holding. Warm and completely still. Linda looked down at his hands around her wrists. Then up at his face. There was nothing controlled about his expression right now. No walls, no carefully managed distance. Just a man who had driven across the city in 9 minutes because the alternative was unthinkable. "I told you," she said quietly, "that I don't need protection." "I know," he said. His grip didn't loosen. "Then why are you still holding my wrists?" He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "Because I can," he said simply. And for the first time, Linda didn't pull away. His men stood around the warehouse in complete silence. Every single one of them watching. Every single one of them knowing they were witnessing something they would never speak about outside this building. Because their boss, the man who had spent 30 years making sure nothing and no one could reach him, was kneeling on a concrete warehouse floor holding a girl's hands like she was the most important thing he had ever touched. And his skin wasn't burning, his chest wasn't tightening, his body wasn't fighting him. For the first time in 34 years, everything was completely still. This is the moment I need you in the comments right now. Because if you felt that, if that just did something to your chest, drop a comment and tell me what you're feeling. I read every single one. If someone sent you this video, tell them thank you from me. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now and hit the bell. Because what happens next between these two will break you open completely in the best possible way. Let's finish this together. They drove back through Seoul in silence. Just the two of them in the back of the car. His men in the vehicle ahead. Linda sat with her hands in her lap, wrists slightly red where the ties had been. Tae-hyun sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. The kind that was full of everything neither person knows how to say yet. Linda looked out the window. How did you find me that fast? I never stopped watching. She turned to look at him, even after the men disappeared. Especially after. She held his gaze. You knew they'd come back. I suspected. And you didn't tell me. No, Tae-hyun. If I had told you, he said quietly, you would have handled it alone. You don't know that. He looked at her steadily. She looked away first, because they both knew he did know that. When the car stopped outside her apartment building, neither of them moved. The driver sat perfectly still in the front seat. A man who had learned that stillness was a professional requirement in this job. Linda looked at her hands. Can I ask you something? Yes. The condition. She paused carefully. The doctors who said it was trauma. The ones you fired. She felt him go still beside her. What happened when you were 9 years old? A long moment passed. She thought he wasn't going to answer. He had closed that door every single time she had come near it. Then, my father, he said. Just those 2 words. Quiet and flat and carrying 30 years of weight inside them. Linda waited. He was the one who built the original network, Tae-hyun said. Before I took it over. Before I built it into what it is now. He looked straight ahead. He was also the most violent man I have ever known. The car was very quiet. The condition started 3 weeks after he died. Linda absorbed that slowly. How did he die? He put his hands on my mother for the last time, Tae-hyun said simply. And I made sure of it. The words landed in the silence like stones dropped into still water. Linda looked at his profile. 9 years old. 9 years old and already carrying something no child should ever have to carry. The doctors who suggested trauma, she said softly. They weren't wrong, were they? It wasn't a question. No, he said quietly. They weren't wrong. Your body connected touch to violence, she said. To pain. To what he did. Every person who ever touched me after that wanted something, he said. Power, control, leverage. Even comfort felt like a transaction. He finally turned to look at her. Until you grabbed my wrist in that hallway. Linda held his gaze. I didn't want anything, she said. I know. I was just trying not to fall. I know. Something moved in his expression. That's exactly why. The space between them in the back of that car felt very small suddenly. Your body knew, she said quietly. Before you did. He looked at her for a long moment. Like he was seeing something he had been trying to name for weeks. Yes, he said. It knew you weren't a threat. It knew more than that, he said. Linda felt her breath change slightly. Tae-hyun. You are the first person, he said quietly, in 30 years, who has ever reached for me without wanting to take something. His eyes didn't leave hers. Every person in my world takes. My organization. My money. My protection. My fear. He exhaled slowly. You gave me street food and told me I looked terrible and made me walk by a river at midnight. The corner of Linda's mouth moved despite everything. You did look terrible. I know. The cold coffee was genuinely concerning. I know. Linda laughed quietly. Just a small exhale of laughter in the back of a car outside her apartment building at 2 in the morning. But it was real. And it broke something open between them completely. Tae-hyun watched her laugh. Like it was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. Like he was memorizing it. Your body never rejected people, she said quietly. He went still. It rejected fear, she continued. She said it gently like she was handing something fragile back to him. All those years. All those reactions. It wasn't broken, Tae-hyun. She held his gaze. It was protecting you. The silence that followed was the deepest one yet. He looked at her like no one had ever looked at her before. Not with desire. Not with calculation. With recognition. The specific kind that happens when someone sees the truest version of you and doesn't look away. He reached forward slowly and took her hand. His fingers laced through hers like it was the simplest thing in the world. Like they had always known how to do this. Linda looked down at their hands, then up at him. Still nothing? She asked softly. He shook his head slowly. Nothing, he said. He had spent 30 years running from the thing that had broken him. And she had spent 30 seconds saying the words that began to heal it. Not because she was extraordinary, but because she saw him. Fully. And stayed anyway. I need you to stop right here with me for a second. Because what she just did in that car, giving that man the words he had never heard in 30 years, that is not just a love story. That is what it looks like when someone chooses to truly see another person. If this story is doing something to you right now, subscribe, hit the bell and share this video with one person who needs to feel something beautiful today. And drop a comment. What did that car scene do to you? I want to know everything. Because we are not done yet. What comes next? Nobody saw coming. 3 days after the warehouse, Kang Seojin requested a private meeting. It was not unusual. In 12 years he had sat across from Tae-hyun in that office hundreds of times. He knew the rhythm of the room. He knew how to read the silences. He knew how to present information in a way that guided decisions without appearing to. It was the skill that had made him indispensable. It was also the skill that had made him dangerous. He sat down across from Tae-hyun with the same composed expression he always wore. Unhurried and unreadable. I wanted to speak with you about the incident, he said. Tae-hyun looked at him. The warehouse has been handled, Tae-hyun said. Yes. Seojin nodded once. But the exposure hasn't. There was a careful pause before he continued. She was taken because someone connected her to you. Which means the connection is visible. Which means it's a liability. Tae-hyun said nothing. I'm not raising this to cause concern, Seojin continued smoothly. I'm raising it because it's my job to protect this organization. And right now, he paused precisely. There is a vulnerability sitting on the executive floor every night at 11 p.m. The office was very quiet. She is not a vulnerability, Tae-hyun said. Something moved behind Seojin's eyes. But it was gone before it could be named. Of course not, he said. I only meant that the people who took her knew exactly where to find her. And exactly who she was to you. He leaned forward slightly. That information came from somewhere. And until we find out where, the risk remains. He said it with the calm of a man presenting facts. Not opinions or agendas, just facts. And the worst part was that he wasn't entirely wrong. Tae-hyun held his gaze for a long moment. I'll look into it, he said finally. Seojin nodded once and stood up. I'll leave the report on your desk. He walked to the door but then paused. There is one more thing, he said without turning around. The condition. The air in the room changed completely. I only raise it because there have been questions. Among the senior team. About your, another precise pause, stability. Given the recent events. Get out, Tae-hyun said quietly. Seojin left. The door closed without a sound. Tae-hyun sat perfectly still at his desk for a long moment. His jaw was tight, his expression completely controlled. But something behind his eyes had sharpened. The way it sharpened when a man who had survived his entire life on instinct started to feel something he couldn't quite name yet. In the corridor outside, Jung-ho watched Seojin walk away, and something sat uneasily in his chest. He had been in this organization for 8 years. He had seen many things, but he had never seen Kang Seojin mention the condition to Tae-hyun's face before. Never once. He stood very still, thinking. In Tae-hyun's world, loyalty was the only currency that never lost its value. But even the most trusted coin could be counterfeit. It started 2 weeks later. The way Seojin did everything. Quietly. Without fingerprints. Her name was Yuna. Introduced through a business context. A new consultant brought in to manage a subsidiary company's communications portfolio. She was polished, educated, and perfectly positioned. She arrived on the executive floor at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday to deliver a briefing document to Tae-hyun personally. A task that would normally go through Jung-ho. But Jung-ho had been sent to the northern office that evening on an errand Seojin had arranged 3 days earlier. Tae-hyun was at his desk when she entered. When he looked up, she smiled. Not the practiced smile of someone performing professionalism. Something warmer than that. Something that looked almost genuine. "I'm sorry to disturb you this late," she said quietly. "Seojin said you preferred reports delivered directly." She set the document on his desk, but then her hand brushed his as she placed the folder down. It was quick, incidental. The kind of contact that happens 100 times a day between ordinary people. Tae-hyun went very still, and to his surprise there was no rash, no burning, no spreading redness up his arm. Just a low, unfamiliar discomfort. Like the beginning of something his body wasn't sure about. Yuna stepped back with the same warm, composed expression. "I'll let you get back to your evening," she said simply. She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. "The night view from up here is beautiful," she said softly, almost to herself. "You must never get used to it." Then she was gone. The door closed quietly behind her. Tae-hyun sat at his desk for a long time after she left, staring at his hand. The way he had stared at his wrist in a hallway months ago. But this time the feeling was different. This time he didn't feel surprised. He felt confused. Because if what happened with Linda was singular, if his body had chosen her specifically, then what was this? What did this mean? He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at Seoul. He thought about Linda's voice in the car. He thought about her hand in his. The absolute stillness of it. The way it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When nothing in his world had ever felt natural before. And then he thought about the not nothing. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass of the window. "It means nothing," he told himself quietly. But Kang Tae-hyun had never been good at lying to himself. And it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a question he was terrified to answer. The most dangerous wounds are never the ones that burn. They are the ones that make you doubt the things you were most sure of. And someone had just planted one. Directly in the place where Kang Tae-hyun was most vulnerable. Linda noticed the shift 3 days later. Not dramatically. Not in a way she could point to and say, "There, that is the thing." Just quietly. The way you notice when the temperature in a room has dropped 2 degrees. Tae-hyun was still there every night. Still appeared at the end of her corridor. Still talked to her. Still watched her with that usual attention that had unsettled her from the very beginning. But something behind his eyes had changed. A distraction she couldn't name. A moment here and there where he seemed to be calculating something he wasn't sharing. She told herself it was work. He ran a billion-dollar criminal empire. Work was always present. She told herself she was reading too much into things. She told herself a lot of things. But Linda George had grown up reading rooms in a Lagos household where the wrong read could cost you. She knew the difference between a man who was busy and a man who was carrying something he didn't know how to put down. She didn't ask. That wasn't how they worked. They didn't ask directly. They circled things. They handed each other food and argued about small things and stood by rivers at midnight and let the important things surface when they were ready. So she waited. Then on Tuesday he handed her coffee without looking at her. It was such a small thing. He always looked at her. Even when he was pretending not to. Even when he was being impossible and controlled and deliberately unreadable. His eyes always found hers first. That Tuesday they didn't. He handed her the cup and looked past her at the window. At the city. At something she couldn't see. She stood there holding the cup thinking. When did that change? She didn't say anything. Neither did he. They stood in silence for a few minutes the way they sometimes did. But this silence was different from their usual ones. This one had a gap in it. Something missing that neither of them named. She left earlier than usual that night. He didn't stop her. He just watched her go. And that was the thing that sat in her chest for the rest of the week and refused to move. On Thursday night she arrived for her shift and the executive floor was empty. No Taehyun at the window. No footsteps behind her in the corridor. No cold coffee abandoned on the window ledge. Nothing. She worked through her full shift in complete silence. He didn't appear once. She told herself it was fine. She clocked out. Took the car he had arranged, a habit now, neither of them had mentioned stopping it, and pressed her forehead against the cool window the whole way home. In the dark of the car she let herself feel it. The thing she had been not feeling all week. That small cold question sitting at the back of her chest. She thought about the first night she had accepted the car. The way he had looked at her through the elevator gap. That single unguarded second of relief on his face. She had told herself not to do this. In the dark of another car. Months ago. But she had done it anyway. And now she was sitting in the back of his car going home from his building. Having spent 4 hours not seeing him. Feeling something she had absolutely no right to feel. Because they had never named this. Whatever this was. He had never offered to name it. And Linda George was not the kind of woman who waited for a man to define her place in his life. She defined her own place everywhere she went. Except apparently here. Except apparently with him. She sat up straight, wiped the expression off her face before the driver could see it in the rearview mirror, and looked back out at the city. She had crossed an ocean to build something of her own. She had survived Lagos and visa queues and midnight shifts and a city that didn't always see her. She had done all of it without flinching. But sitting in the back of his car on a Thursday night, missing a man who was probably still in his office 40 floors above her, was the thing that almost broke her composure completely. She almost didn't go back. She had finished her shift, clocked out, pulled on her jacket. Was halfway to the elevator when she remembered the spray bottle. Left behind one of the boardroom credences at the end of the corridor. It was a small thing, barely worth the trip back. But it was her equipment and she was responsible for it and Linda George did not leave things behind. So she went back. The executive corridor was dark. Most of the lights on a timer after midnight. Just the low amber glow of the emergency strips along the floor. She moved quietly. No cart this time. Just her and the silence and the distant buzz of the city 40 floors below. She found the spray bottle exactly where she had left it. Crouched down, picked it up, and that was when she heard it. The boardroom doors were almost closed. There was a gap of 2 inches. Just enough. Seo-jin's voice came first. The kind of voice that understood exactly how to fill a room without raising itself. The reaction was partial, but it was real. Linda went completely still. She is not the anomaly you think she is. She didn't breathe. The condition responds to emotional safety, not to a specific individual. Which means what she triggers in you is replicable. Given the right circumstances. Given the right person. There was a pause. Someone controllable. Someone whose loyalty is not in question. Then silence from the other side of the door. Linda stood in the dark corridor with the spray bottle in her hand. Not moving, not thinking, just listening. Seo-jin spoke again. Quieter now. Like a man who had been waiting a long time to say exactly this. She is a student Taehyun. A foreign national on a temporary visa. She has no understanding of this world. No protection within it. The warehouse proved that. He paused. She is a liability dressed as a comfort. And you are too intelligent a man to let sentiment compromise 12 years of work. The words landed in the corridor like something physical. Linda felt them. Every single one. She heard Taehyun's voice then. Flat and controlled. The way it got when something had moved past anger into something colder and more dangerous. Who arranged the warehouse? It was not a question. It was a statement with edges on it. That is not. Who arranged it? Seo-jin. The air inside the boardroom shifted so completely Linda felt it through the gap in the door. Like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in 1 second. I arranged a test, Seo-jin said carefully. To demonstrate the liability. Not to harm her. The intention was never. Get out. 2 words. Said so quietly they were almost gentle. But Linda had heard Taehyun's quiet enough times now to know. It was never gentle. She backed away from the door. 1 step, then another. She walked to the elevator with the spray bottle in her hand and her heart hammering so loud she was sure the whole floor could hear it. She pressed the button and waited before the doors opened and she stepped in. And stood in the mirrored elevator looking at her own reflection as the doors closed. She looked completely calm. But she did not feel completely calm. She pressed the ground floor button. And stood very still for the 11 seconds it took the elevator to descend. 11 seconds to decide what to do with what she had just heard. It wasn't enough time. But it would have to be. Seo-jin had arranged the warehouse. Not opportunistic street men who had noticed her on their own. Someone inside Taehyun's organization. Someone he had trusted for 12 years had pointed those men directly at her. Had used her as a demonstration. As evidence. As a tool to push her out of Taehyun's life. When the elevator reached the ground floor, the doors opened and Linda walked out into the night air. Linda stood on the pavement outside Hansong Tower. The city moved around her without asking permission. And she made herself think clearly. Not emotionally. Clearly. She thought about the Tuesday coffee moment. His eyes not finding hers. The gap in the silence. And she understood it now. He was a man whose body had been his only reliable truth for 30 years. And someone had introduced doubt into the one thing he thought he finally understood. She thought about what Seo-jin had said. She thought about a van and zip ties and 6 men in an alley. She thought about a warehouse floor and his hands around her wrists. Then she made a decision. She could have walked away. Any reasonable person would have walked away. But Linda George had never done anything because it was reasonable. She did things because they were true. And the truth was that she wasn't finished. She went back up. Not because she was afraid of what she had heard. Not because she needed him to explain himself. But because she had never been the kind of woman who sat with the truth and did nothing about it. She found him exactly where she expected. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the executive corridor. Looking out at the city. The way he looked when he was carrying something too heavy to set down. She had learned that about him. The window was where he went when the weight got too much. She walked up and stood beside him. Didn't say anything immediately. Just stood there. Looking at the same city he was looking at. The silence between them lasted a long moment. But this silence was different from all the others. This one had everything in it. I heard the conversation, she said. He went very still. Linda. I'm not here to be angry, she said quietly. I just want to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly. Ask me anything, he said. She kept her eyes on the city. The woman. The consultant. Did it happen? The question sat in the air between them. Simple and direct and impossible to avoid. His jaw tightened. Partially, he said. She nodded slowly. Like she had already known but needed to hear him say it. But it wasn't the same, he said immediately. Taehyun. I swear it wasn't the same, Linda. He turned to face her fully. I know the difference. My body knows the difference. What happened with her was. He stopped, searching for the right words. Something she had never seen him do before. Kang Taehyun always had the right words. But right now, he was searching. Static, he said finally. She turned to look at him. It felt like static. Like interference. Like something that was almost a signal but wasn't. His eyes stayed on hers. What happens when you touch me is not static. It has never been static. From the very first second in that hallway. He stopped again. It has never once felt like static. Linda held his gaze for a long moment. How do I know that's true? She said quietly. And not just what you need it to be true. The question sat in the air between them. Honest and hard and completely fair. And from the look on his face, he knew it. He looked at her for a long time. Like he was searching for something that words couldn't reach. And then he did something she had never seen him do. He reached up slowly. And touched her face. His palm against her cheek was completely still. No hesitation, no waiting, no closed eyes this time. He looked directly at her. Like he needed her to see exactly what was happening. Like he needed to be seen doing it. No burning, he said quietly. No static. No interference. His thumb moved gently against her cheekbone. Just you. Linda felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been cold all week, going warm again. She had walked back into this building with her jaw set and her walls up and her mind clear. She had told herself she was coming for answers. Not for this. Never for this. You have to deal with Seo-jin, she said. I know, he replied. His hand didn't move from her face. 12 years doesn't mean what it used to mean. I know, he nodded. And the woman. She won't be back, he said simply. Linda looked at him. At the hand still resting against her face. At the man who had spent 30 years making sure nothing could reach him. Standing in front of her completely open. No empire between them. No walls. No distance. Just him. You scared me, she said quietly. It cost her something to say it, and he heard exactly what it cost. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Without thinking, Linda reached up and covered his hand with hers and held it against her face. Don't let people use me against you, she said. Not ever. If there is a threat, tell me. I can handle the truth. What I cannot handle is being kept in the dark. Yes, he said. Not I'll try. Not I'll consider it. Just yes. Like a promise he had already decided to keep. And Taehyun. Yes. She looked at him steadily. The next time someone tells you that what we have is replicable. She held his gaze. Remember this moment. He looked at her hand over his, at the city behind her, at the 30 years that had somehow led to exactly this. I will, he said quietly. He had protected her from the world for months, kept her safe from dangers she couldn't see. But it was Linda, who protected him from the most dangerous thing of all. Doubt. The kind that doesn't burn. The kind that just quietly dims everything. And she had walked back into that building and turned the lights back on. Kang Seo-jin was removed from his position the following Monday morning. No announcement. No confrontation in front of the senior team. No drama of any kind. Just a meeting behind closed doors that lasted 11 minutes. When the door opened, Seo-jin walked out with the stillness of a man who had just understood the full consequence of his own calculation. He had spent 12 years learning how Taehyun operated. He should have known better. He cleared his office by noon. By 3 p.m. his access cards had been deactivated. By 6 p.m. it was as if 12 years had been quietly folded and put away. That was how Taehyun operated. Without excess. Without cruelty. But absolutely. Jung-ho watched it all from his position near the operations room. He thought about the night he had stood in the corridor watching Seo-jin walk away after mentioning the condition. He had known then that something had been wrong. He had filed it away and said nothing because it wasn't his place. But he had known. He found Taehyun that evening in the private office. His jacket was off. He was sitting at his desk with the quiet that wasn't emptiness. Hyung. Taehyun looked up. 12 years, Jung-ho said carefully. Are you? Don't, Taehyun said simply. Jung-ho stopped. It was never loyalty, Taehyun said. It was proximity mistaken for loyalty. There's a difference. Yes, sir. Taehyun looked back at his desk. Miss George's building security. Increase it permanently. Not the temporary arrangement. A permanent detail. Understood. And Jung-ho? Yes. Tae-hyun looked at him steadily. Thank you. Jung-ho blinked. In 8 years Kang Tae-hyun had never once said those words to him. For what? For knowing, Tae-hyun said simply. And waiting until I knew too. Jung-ho stood very still for a moment before he nodded once. Good night, sir. As he left, Tae-hyun sat alone in the office. The city glittered below him. The same view he had looked at for years. The same skyline. But it felt different tonight. Everything had felt different for months now. Since a cleaning girl grabbed his wrist in a hallway. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a single item. A printed photograph. Security footage still. Timestamp 11:47 p.m. A girl with a mop and a jaw set with fury and her back already turned to the most feared man in Seoul. Walking away like he was absolutely nobody. He looked at it for a long moment and thought about a girl who had said your body wasn't broken. It was protecting you, and handed him back 30 years of himself in one sentence. He set the photograph down carefully on the desk in front of him. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Kang Tae-hyun smiled. Not the almost smile. A real smile. He had dismantled a 12-year betrayal in 11 minutes. Rebuilt his security in an afternoon. Handled everything his world required of him with the precision it always had. And then he sat alone in an office at the top of Seoul. And smiled at a photograph of a girl who had called him crazy. 3 months later in Seoul National University, it was graduation day. The courtyard was full of families and flowers and the specific kind of joy that only comes from surviving something hard. Cameras were flashing. Names were being called. Caps thrown into pale blue sky. Linda stood in her graduation gown in the middle of it all. Alone. Her mother couldn't afford the flight from Lagos. Her father had sent a voice note that made her cry in the bathroom before the ceremony. Her roommate was somewhere in the crowd taking photos of her own family. Linda stood with her certificate in her hands and smiled at nothing in particular. She was proud, exhausted, quietly lonely in the specific way that big moments can make you feel when the people you love most aren't there to see them. She looked up at the sky. I did it, Mum, she said quietly. To no one. To the sky. To every midnight cleaning shift and cheap instant coffee and 4-hour lecture and empty dinner and exhausted morning that had led her to this exact moment. To the version of herself that had arrived in Seoul 3 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and one rule her mother had given her. Never let a powerful man make you small. And she hadn't. I actually did it. She felt him before she saw him. That specific shift in the air. The way a crowd parts for someone without being asked. She turned around slowly and Kang Tae-hyun was standing at the edge of the courtyard. Dark coat. No bodyguards. Just him. Holding a single stem of her favorite flower. Something she had mentioned exactly once. On a night walk beside the Han River 6 weeks ago. In a sentence she hadn't even finished. But he had remembered anyway. Linda looked at him across the courtyard. At the man who had shoved her into a wall in a hallway. Who had grabbed her wrist like a science experiment. Who had eaten street food in Myeongdong like it was the first time he had tasted anything real. Who had sat in the back of a car and handed her 30 years of himself in the dark. Who had touched her face and said just you. She didn't wait for him to cross the distance this time. She walked toward him. Not slowly. Not hesitantly. With the same directness she brought to everything. Because she had learned something across all these months. That reaching first wasn't weakness. It was just truth made visible. She stopped in front of him and looked up at his face. You came. Yes. You remembered the flower. I remember everything you say. She took it from him and looked at it for a moment. Then back up at him. My mother couldn't come, she said. I know. I was standing there feeling, she paused. It doesn't matter. It matters, he said immediately. She looked at him. You were standing there feeling alone, he said quietly. In the middle of one of the most important moments of your life. She didn't answer because he was right. And because the fact that he knew that, without her saying it, did something complicated to her chest. You're not alone, Linda, he said. She looked at him for a long time as the courtyard moved happily around them with families embracing and friends laughing and the world doing what the world does on days like this. "You're different," she said softly. "From what?" "From the man I crashed into in that hallway." He considered that. "So are you," he said. "I haven't changed." "You reached first," he said simply. She looked down at their hands. Then back up at him. "I'm still terrified," she said. "Of what?" "Of your world. Of what it asks. Of what it costs." He nodded slowly. "So am I," he said. She blinked. "You're terrified." "Every single day," he said. "Since the night you grabbed my wrist." "Of what?" He looked at her steadily. "Of losing the one thing that makes me feel human." She looked down at the flower in her hands. Then back up at him. "I almost didn't call you," she said. "That night in the alley." "I know. I scrolled past your name twice." "I know that too." "How?" "Because you are the most stubbornly independent person I have ever met," he said. "And I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give." Linda laughed. That same quiet real laugh from the back of the car. From every moment in between. Tae-hyun watched it happen. Like he was still memorizing it. Like he never planned to stop. She shook her head slowly. "What are we doing, Tae-hyun?" He reached forward and tucked a loose braid behind her ear. "The way someone touches something they are terrified of losing. Something neither of us is good at," he said quietly. "Which is?" His eyes met hers. "Letting someone in. And that is where we leave them. Standing in the light. Holding on together." Thank you so much for watching both parts of this story all the way to the end. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You stayed through the hallway and the warehouse and the car and the betrayal and all of it. And that means everything to me. If Linda and Tae-hyun did something to your heart today, please subscribe so you never miss the next cinematic love story on this channel. Like this video. Share it with one person who needs something beautiful today. And leave me a comment right now. I want to know, which moment got you the most across both parts? The wrist in the hallway? The warehouse floor? The car confession? The corridor when she came back? Or this final moment in the courtyard? Tell me everything. I read every single one. And I will see you in the next one. Peace out.